Hey friends, you didn't think I was going to not do an Instagram live given the news of today. Hi everyone. Happy Sunday, 8:10 Eastern Time, and obviously it's been a very important day in our country, an unprecedented day. As we know, earlier this afternoon, President Joe Biden, who had been isolating at home with COVID, issued an announcement that he is withdrawing from the presidential race and endorsed his Vice President Kamala Harris. His statement read in part, "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president, and while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interests of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. I will speak to the nation later this week in more detail about my decision." So, of course, hi everyone. Hi. I thought that we should have a conversation with Brian Goldsmith. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Katie.
Urging President Biden to step down. I think this is an important day. It's also a bit of a sad day, I think. It's been very anxiety producing. I'm getting my followers kind of telling us how they've been feeling. Someone said they were sad. Someone said that it's been stressful. And if you all have any questions for Brian, please put them in the question page, only because comments can be a little distracting, even though I love to hear what you all have to say. So Brian, gosh, it's funny. I was reading an article that you had sent me from the Bulwark saying enough already with the Biden psychodrama. And it was sort of a critical article about urging the Democrats and President Biden specifically to make a decision. Were you surprised that there were predictions that this was going to happen on Sunday? So how surprised or not surprised were you?
I mean, I think it was both shocking and unsurprising,
Right.
oddly, because it is not sustainable when you've lost the support of so many elected Democrats, when your campaign has severe financial difficulties, when the polling shows that you really don't have a path to defeating Donald Trump, which Democrats believe, which I believe is an existential threat. You can't really move forward. And it's not as though the president's problem was fixable. The problem was clearly not fixable. And so, now we move toward, I think, a much better place for the president, where his achievements, his legacy can be rightly celebrated, where he can focus on closing out the last, 5-6 months of his term in the strongest possible position, and pass the torch. And honestly, despite all the pressure, the feelings of aggravation and disappointment that some Democrats, felt over the last weeks, I think that's all just going to wash away. I think and people are rightly going to focus on how rare this is historically for a president to have his party's nomination in hand and to decline it in service of a larger goal.
Brian, what do you think ultimately made him make this decision? Was it recent polling? Because, we have been following the polling, no one more closely than you. And there was some polling that indicated that his support was still strong. I was very confused by the polls, because it seemed to me some were saying the debate performance didn't have that big an impact. Then I'd hear that previously Democratic leaning states like my home state of Virginia and Minnesota and New Hampshire, his support was eroding there. Can you give us some perspective on that? Because honestly, it was really hard for me to figure it out and follow it.
Well, thank you for teeing up one of my favorite topics. First of all, let me just say, there are a lot of people online who are, what I might call polling truthers, who said, all polling is bad. We know the polling doesn't work because, 2016, 2020, the red wave in 2022. Let me just break that down for a second. There was an analysis done by 538 of the 2022 polling that found that that polling was the most accurate in decades, that it was basically commentators who were making assumptions that there was going to be a red wave based on how they felt undecided voters may ultimately fall, not the polling that was predicting it. And in 16 and in 20, the polling was pretty good. It was within the margin of error, but if anything, it undercounted Trump's support.
Right.
Trump outperformed his polling both times he was on the ballot.
So you're saying polling has been fairly accurate in recent years and certainly in 2022. But can we focus on the polling that was coming in now?
Yeah. So I think there were Biden stands on Twitter and Instagram who were basically saying, look, there's a margin of error race. The popular vote is within a couple of points. Biden could come back, et cetera. Here's why I think most Democratic political professionals saw it in much darker terms than that. Biden won the popular vote by 4.5 points in 2020. That only gave him enough cushion to win the Electoral College by about 45,000 votes. In other words, if 45,000 votes had switched to Trump in 3 states, Trump would have been reelected. It was actually that close in the Electoral College. And so if you're talking about a race where Biden is down 2 or 3, that's like a 6 or 7 point swing down from where he was on Election Day in 2020. And there's really no hope of getting to 270 with national popular vote numbers like that. And there was a lot of bad quality polling that was sort of circulating online. Most of the higher quality polling showed a decline of 2 or 3 points in the president's position since the debate last month. Now you may think, oh, 2 or 3 points, that's not that big of a deal. The thing is, we are so closely divided, so tribal, so partisan right now that, the Democrats could run Daffy Duck and get 45% of the vote. So you're not going to actually fall that much. I mean, it's not as though somebody could do the equivalent of Reagan's 49 state landslide in 1984. We're too locked in. The number of undecideds is too small. But a 2 to 3 point swing in that context, consistently in a lot of the battlegrounds, that's very scary. And that's from a position of weakness. The reason, remember, we had the debate last month.
Because President Biden was lagging in the polls prior to the debate. He wanted to shift the conversation the other way and kind of reframe his campaign and his candidacy. And of course, it had the opposite result. Do you think the polls were what do you think polling was the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of convincing President Biden that he could not beat Donald Trump if he stayed on the ticket?
Well, I think it's a little more like Murder on the Orient Express, where everybody did it. There were elected officials who were very concerned about their own prospects if Biden led the ticket. We're also very concerned about the possibility of Trump winning because they knew the stakes. There were a lot of donors who were very concerned about Biden's capacity to win the election. Now, you could say a lot of that is driven by the polling, so maybe the polling to an extent is part of the engine behind this, but that's not the only metric. Contributions to the campaign kind of fell off a cliff. There was like an initial burst of enthusiasm after the debate, but then small dollar and big dollar declined dramatically. Right. So it was not a sustainable position for him to be in.
Let's look forward. By the way, I've got something like 58 questions, maybe even more. I think, 53 questions. Sorry, my glasses. I need stronger glasses. But let's look ahead. Obviously, was there no choice for a number of reasons than I was surprised as he made the announcement. And I don't know if I missed something. Barack Obama gave a statement, but didn't endorse Kamala Harris, unless that's come between.
I haven't seen it.
Okay.
No. Yeah.
So, and then President Biden endorsed Kamala Harris. Was that the only choice? Because as we have talked about, other politicians or political analysts have been urging there to be a mini primary so the American people could look at a whole field of candidates. Tell me why Kamala was the I mean, why he endorsed Kamala and didn't go for a more open process.
Well, to your point, I don't think it was the only choice. Barack Obama did not endorse Joe Biden, but of course, Joe Biden didn't ultimately decide to run for president in 2016. Ronald Reagan did not endorse his vice president, George Bush Sr. So he could have just stayed out of it. What makes this circumstance unique, among other things, is just the incredibly compressed time frame. I mean, the convention is just a few weeks away. And I think among Democrats, there's almost no appetite right now for a fiercely contested battle, as to who our nominee is. I think there's a realization that we're like 106 days from the general election. We need to get our asses in gear and we need to go out there and run. And I think the sense among a lot of Democrats is, Harris was always going to be the overwhelming favorite, even if the president didn't endorse her. So if that's where we're going to land anyway, let's just land there faster and get the campaign going, because we've lost a lot of time during this process.
Let's talk about the polls and what they're showing about Kamala's chances.
Well, they're showing that she's running a couple of points better than Biden. But I would caution everyone that hypothetical polling has a bad track record. That is, pollsters saying, well, if the contest were between this candidate who's not a candidate right now and the other guy, how would you vote? I mean, it tells you something, but it's not the same thing as polling the actual race that's happening between two live nominees.
Right.
And where I think a lot of Democrats take some comfort, as we were discussing earlier, Katie, across lots and lots and lots of polls, what you see is that most of Biden's support among white people from 4 years ago has held. He's about where he was in 2020. What's gone down has been his support among Latinos and Black people, especially men, Latino men and Black men.
And I know that when I interviewed Kamala Harris, earlier this year, I think it was in February because it was snowing in Washington. I learned that her polling among Black and Latino voters is much better than Joe Biden's. Having said that, though, what I've been hearing is, and you can see it in this sort of strength versus weakness campaign that the Trump folks are running, that men in general, I mean, of all colors, are gravitating towards Donald Trump. Can you illuminate that for us, Brian?
I don't know how much of it is a pro-Trump move versus concern about Biden. The strength versus weakness thing was it was an argument about Biden's age and condition. It was, as David Axelrod put it, the world is out of control and Biden's not in command. And into that, they folded immigration, foreign wars, inflation, etc. Well, a couple of ways that Kamala kind of messes that up.
Or neutralizes that argument, right?
Right. Well, first of all, now Trump, not the Democratic candidate, is the oldest nominee in American history. He's actually older than Biden was 4 years ago.
And older than John McCain.
Older than McCain, older than Reagan the second time, older than any candidate who's ever run before. We have now an energetic 59-year-old former prosecutor against a 34-time convicted felon. That's a contrast Democrats like. We have someone who can formulate and prosecute an argument about abortion rights. So if you ask Democrats, the election's probably going to be about, personal freedom, about abortion, and about economic fairness. If you ask Republicans, the election's going to be about, costs, inflation, and identity. And they're going to fold into identity all sorts of stuff, some of which is fairly dark.
I've seen evidence about that already. I saw a montage, I believe, on Instagram that various conservative commentators and Republican politicians were calling Kamala Harris the first DEI candidate, which to me is so obviously such a racist trope and such a dog whistle, but more acceptable than than saying something that was just outright racist. Have you heard that jargon a lot already?
Sure. And they're going to deploy that. You know, they made a lot of racist arguments against Barack Obama. They're going to do the same thing against Kamala Harris. This is somebody who was, you know, twice elected district attorney in San Francisco, twice elected attorney general of California, elected to the Senate in California before she ever met Joe Biden. She's very well qualified to be president of the United States. In fact, when you're vice president for 4 years, there's sort of no greater education you can get, you know, in terms of how the world works and national security, foreign policy, all of that stuff. But I am sure it's going to be a tough and ugly campaign because Trump, you know, just gravitates toward identity. My friend Lynn Vavreck, who's an excellent UCLA political science professor, with her partners wrote a kind of the definitive book about 2016 called Identity Crisis that I highly recommend to everybody. And basically what it says is the whole kind of trope about economic anxiety driving support for Trump, you know, these hollowed out towns in the Midwest, and they were, you know, voting for him because of, that really was not a driver of his support, and never has been. That if you actually run an experiment and you control for someone's income or economic situation, you can't really predict whether they're going to be a Democrat or a Trump supporter. If you control for their views on race, ethnicity, those kind of cultural questions, you can almost surgically pinpoint who's going to be a Trump supporter. What he did is he has elevated a lot of, raised the salience, to use the fancy political science jargon, of these issues, these identity, race, culture issues, and put them kind of at the center of our politics in a way that Republicans like McCain and Romney were unwilling to do.
I want to ask you a couple of other quick questions, and I know you have some other things that you're doing, and I'm going to be talking to Maggie Haberman about how the Trump campaign may respond to this and also get her insights about President Biden's announcement today. But just to channel my viewers and followers, people are asking why Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama haven't endorsed Kamala Harris. Do you think they're giving it some time out of respect to Joe Biden to kind of let him have this day? Or why do you think there's been a delay in that?
I think part of it is, you know, some people want to make the whole day about the president and it's sort of paying tribute to him, which I can understand. I think there is a reluctance to make it look like a coronation. And so I think people, some Democratic elected officials want there to be, you know, some kind of a process in place. I think ultimately there will be a process, but I'm not sure that anybody significant is going to challenge the vice president in that process.
And she's also said she wants to earn the nomination, right? I mean, I think she is telegraphing that she's not taking this for granted, correct?
I thought that was very important language.
Yeah, why don't you explain to people watching what she said?
I don't have the tweet in front of me, but she said pretty much what you said, that she looks forward to working to earn the nomination, something like that. And, you know, she wants to send the message to people that, you know, she's going to be reaching out to the delegates. She's going to be communicating to voters. She doesn't, you know, she doesn't want to look like this was just handed to her. And Can I play political analyst for 2 seconds and just turn the tables? I think that she will do well with women, with her full-throated support, not all women, but with her full-throated support of reproductive rights. I think she'll do better, as we've talked about, with Blacks and Latino voters. Obviously, Black women, I think, are already in her fan base. But I also think she'll re-energize young people. Do you think that's possible, Brian, that she might get younger voters excited about this election in a way they haven't been with Joe Biden at the top of the ticket? Yeah, I think that's very possible. I mean, I was working on an effort that kind of froze since the debate to try to persuade 18 to 29-year-olds that they shouldn't stay home. These were people who largely were not going to vote for Trump, but they might have stayed home. They might have considered voting third party and try to convince them to vote for Biden. And, you know, part of it was just the kind of the cultural challenge of connecting with an 81-year-old president. part of it was that, for a lot of young people, it's been a challenging 4 years between COVID and costs, housing costs, student debt. Although, of course, the Biden-Harris administration's done a lot around student debt. Inflation is really a powerful issue among people who are living, kind of paycheck to paycheck, and young people tend to be the most economically insecure. So I think, Harris does have an opportunity to reset there.
I can't believe you could. First of all, you think the donors going to start opening their pocketbooks up again now that she's.
Oh yeah, I think small dollar donors have already contributed like $26 or $27 million today.
Since the announcement,
already.
Wow.
Yeah.
And sorry to interrupt, Brian. I have to go in 2 minutes because I don't want to leave Maggie waiting too long, and she only has 15 minutes herself. But I have to address the vice presidential choice because a million people in the question section want to talk about that. All right, let's just name some names. Josh Shapiro's name has been mentioned. He's the governor of Pennsylvania. Is he too green? What are the advantages of picking someone like Josh Shapiro and the disadvantages real quickly?
Very strong choice. I think he's like a 59% approval rating in Pennsylvania. It's a state Kamala needs to win. The disadvantage is he's been a governor for a year and a half, but he was attorney general, I think, before then. So he's well qualified.
Also Jewish. Do you think that would work against him?
It's funny. I mentioned this to somebody I know, somebody too, very veteran Democratic strategist. And his response was, the only people who ask me about that are Jews. Nobody else really cares. I don't think that's going to be a big deal. I think Lieberman proved that was not the reason that Al Gore didn't become president in 2000.
Okay, let's talk about Mark Kelly. I've heard Mark Kelly, a friend of mine, Gabby Gifford's husband, Navy astronaut, Arizona, very important state. What about Mark Kelly?
Another very strong choice. I'm sure he's going to be on the short list. There is a little bit of a concern about the very competitive Senate seat opening up if you were to pick him. I do think the process, though, is that the Democratic governor picks the successor, so maybe they don't have to worry about that as much. But again, very, very strong choice. I think the problem with a lot of these people, just to be clear, is you might potentially have a Ron DeSantis situation where you have a very strong, popular, statewide elected official who has not been tested and vetted nationally. And a national campaign is just a horse of a different feather.
What about, I feel like of all the governors, Gavin Newsom has had the biggest national platform, but he comes with some baggage, I know, in California. And
you can't pick Gavin because you can't have two people from the same state.
Oh, gosh. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Someone wrote that would be Don Jr.'s nightmare because Kimberly Guilfoyle was married to Gavin Newsom. I mean, you can't make
sleep easy, Don Jr. It ain't gonna happen.
Anyone else who you're thinking might have a shot?
Well, listen, I'm biased, but I think Pete Buttigieg would be a very strong choice. I think a lot of people are making the kind of superficial judgment. Oh, well, you're not going to put a gay guy with the, black woman. I think the people who would have a problem with that are probably not part of the Democratic coalition anyway. And then you look a quarter of an inch deeper, Midwest, moderate, military veteran, mayor. And he, unlike these other names we're talking about, has been tested and vetted on the national stage.
I mean, I'm a huge Pete fan. I love that he goes on Fox News and basically buries them with his arguments. So I'm a big Pete fan. I don't know. I wonder. Well, I don't know. I wonder about sexism. I wonder about homophobia. I wonder if they would have an impact for both sexism, racism, and homophobia. It's the trifecta, and I worry about all of those things for whatever ticket, if this were to be the ticket. Hey, Brian, I have to go. I have to go, but along those lines, you and I, as somebody who's kind of experienced sexism professionally, I'm just wondering if you think the country would elect a female president now, 8 years later.
Well, what do you think? You're the woman here, and then I'll give you my answer.
I hope so. That's my answer. I hope that the country would be open to electing a female president. I do think that the country has changed quite dramatically with the Supreme Court and with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And I think that has galvanized many women in ways that they weren't necessarily galvanized in 2016. So I think that there's that. And what about you?
I think, but for James Comey's letter, Hillary would have won in 2016. I think people are still underestimating the level of sexism, both from women and men, that a female candidate for president would face. So it's something she's going to have to deal with. It's an issue, without question. I mean, you and I remember in 2008 the Hillary nutcrackers that were being sold at airports, and nobody really said anything except you about it at the time. So how far have we come since 2008? Maybe a bit farther, but we'll have to see. It's really tricky because, as somebody once said, I think it was the great Tina Fey, you're either too weak or you're a bitch, and it's very hard to strike the balance.
Those two archetypes or stereotypes. Hey, I have 2 more minutes because Maggie's stepping is going to join us at 8:40, which is really nice of her. But so when will we see a public appearance? They're not going to wait clearly till the convention to do some kind of announcement, but it also needs to be, I think, kind of presented as a big deal. So when do you think we'll see President Biden with Vice President Harris and some kind of announcement saying I'm passing the torch, or this, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How are they going to orchestrate this?
Well, I mean, I think you're right. It is a big deal. Her first public moment since then as the kind of presumptive nominee is going to be a huge deal, and all eyes will be on her. And so then the question is, how do you orchestrate that? Do you combine it with Biden's event? I mean, as part of his announcement, he said he's going to do a public speech when he's feeling better, talking to the nation. Does Biden want to combine that with the passing of the torch? I mean, if I were orchestrating it, I would probably do it as 2 separate events. But you can't have Harris waiting that long to go public. Mm-hmm. So she'll probably do something, on the early side of this week. Then you have, I think Bibi Netanyahu is on Wednesday. You have Biden, doing his statement maybe on the later end of this week, and then you can create a whole nother moment where you have Biden and Harris together and have him praise her and pass the torch.
And you can't really wait for the convention to do that.
No, and then you're going to have other moments. You're going to have her announcement of a running mate, and that's going to happen. I mean, I am sure that a number of law firms in Washington, D.C. are calling in their associates from, Rehoboth or wherever they are, because you're going to have to do a really fast vet of a lot of people.
And a lot of people have asked me if basically if Michelle Obama has any chance of, I think the answer to that is a snowball's chance in hell that Michelle Obama will throw her hat in the ring. I think she probably will. I hope that she will possibly campaign for the Democratic ticket. But I think people who are hoping that she'll get involved, or honestly, they need to figure out something else to fantasize about.
She hates politics. That's what everybody says who knows her. I don't know her, but everybody who knows her says, she was grateful for her time in the White House, but she's very grateful to be out of it now, and she does not want to go back. And if she had wanted to get back into politics, she could have run for president in 2020 and probably walked away with the nomination. So that's not going to happen. I'm sure she's going to speak at the convention, and I'm sure it'll be a fabulous speech.
And it'll be nice to see Joe Biden get a hero's welcome at the Democratic National Convention instead of this very mixed reception if he had stayed in the race. Brian, you're such a pal. And by the way, everyone, I'm pretty proud of myself because I perused the questions that you had put in the questions section, and I kind of asked them all. I think almost all of them. So, Brian, I'm going to talk to Maggie. Watch if you get a chance.
I will. Katie, I think you got a big future as an interviewer. I think you're good at this thing.
I mean, I'm so fascinated by all of this and this whole process, and a very strange but really fascinating and
We're
potentially
living
exciting
history.
time.
What's that line about, there are like, decades when nothing happens and weeks where decades happen, and we feel like, we're in this period right now.
Definitely. Anyway, lots of love to Claire and the kids, and thank you again, Brian, for doing
Thanks,
this. My
Katie. Love you too.
followers,
We'll
my
talk soon.
followers love you,
Oh,
so thank
please.
you. Okay, you guys, stand by. Maggie
Bye.
Haberman is on deck. That's right after this. I feel like I'm back on. Okay, bye, Brian.
Bye, Katie.
Bye.